The unforgiving wind howled, a frigid predatory beast tearing at the last vestiges of twilight. Elias, a young hunter in his mid-20s, pushed his bruised body against the relentless gale, each step a struggle against the thickening snow. The storm had come out of nowhere, a sudden blinding fury that had scattered his hunting party and swallowed the trail. For 3 days he'd been alone, a ghost in a sea of white, his provisions dwindling to a handful of jerky and a few bullets he was too weak to use. A deep gash on his thigh, a souvenir from a fall, throbbed with a dull, insistent pain. Each pulse a reminder of his vulnerability. He was close to succumbing to the cold, his mind a foggy landscape of delirium. Then a flicker of hope. Through the swirling flakes, a thin plume of smoke rose from a chimney, a beacon of life in this dead expanse. With a renewed, desperate energy, Elias stumbled toward it, his frozen fingers fumbling with the latch of a small, rustic cabin. He collapsed inside, the warmth a shock to his system, his consciousness ebbing away. A shadow moved in the flickering firelight. "You're a long way from anywhere, boy," a woman's voice, raspy and low, said. Elias's eyes fluttered open. A woman, her face etched with the lines of hard living, stood before him. She was Inupiaq, her dark eyes sharp and appraising, her worn caribou hide parka a testament to a life lived in harmony with the brutal land. She was alone, her solitude as palpable as the cold outside. Her name, he would later learn, was Ayla. She tended to his wound with deft, practiced hands, an ancient poultice of herbs and moss that soothed the burning pain. She offered him a bowl of warm stew, a savory concoction of caribou and root vegetables. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. "You are not of this place," Ayla said, her voice a quiet observation. "No," Elias managed to reply, the warmth of the cabin slowly thawing the ice in his veins. "From Fairbanks. We were hunting. The storm." Ayla nodded, as if she had heard this story 100 times. The land does not care for man's plans. Days turned into weeks. The storm raged on, a white wall of imprisonment. Elias, too weak to travel, was a captive in the small cabin. Ayla was a woman of few words, but her actions spoke volumes. She taught him how to set snares, to mend a snowshoe, to read the subtle language of the wind and the trees. She never asked for payment, but her silent presence was a constant, unsettling challenge. He was a man who had always taken what he needed from the land, a product of a culture that saw the wilderness as a resource. Ayla, on the other hand, was part of the wilderness. She lived with it, not against it. One evening, as the fire crackled, Ayla finally broke the silence. Her gaze was fixed on the flames. "When you leave," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you will have to tell them." "Tell them what?" Elias asked, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. She turned to him, her dark eyes holding his. "You will have to tell them you found me, and you will tell them you found me alone. You will lie beside me, Elias, and say you saw no one else." Elias was taken aback. "Why? Who would I tell them about?" "A boy," she said, the word a heavy stone in the quiet room. "My son. He left. A hunting trip. He never came back. The elders, they said his spirit was weak, that I should have done more to prepare him. They want to find him, to bring him home. But he is gone, and if you tell them I am alone, they will leave me be. They will not take me away." Elias was stunned. The lie in the prophecy was not one of deceit, but of complicity. He would have to protect Ayla's secret, to bear the weight of her grief and her independence. The chill that ran through him wasn't from the cold, but from the sudden, profound understanding of the human cost of survival. He had come to this cabin seeking warmth, and had found himself in the heart of a human tragedy. "I cannot do that," Elias said, his voice trembling. "They will know. They will ask questions." Ayla's face hardened. Then you starve tomorrow. I can get by on my own. You cannot. The fire crackled, its light casting long dancing shadows on their faces. The wind howled a mournful song outside. Elias looked at the woman, her face a mask of grief and determination. He saw not a request, but a desperate plea. He saw a mother who had lost everything and was now fighting to protect the last shred of her dignity and her privacy. He saw the cold, brutal truth of the Alaskan wilderness, a place where survival often demanded impossible sacrifices. The days after Ayla's request were heavy, with a silence thicker than the snow outside. Elias, no longer a stranger, but not yet an ally, found himself caught between his desire for self-preservation and his moral code. He had always prided himself on his honesty, his directness. To lie for Ayla felt like a betrayal of his own character, yet to refuse meant almost certain death. Ayla, sensing his hesitation, said nothing more on the subject. Instead, she immersed herself in the quiet rhythm of her life. She would leave early each morning to check her snares, her silent form a stark silhouette against the white backdrop. She would return with a small rabbit or a ptarmigan, and they would share the meager meal in silence. Elias, still nursing his leg wound, spent his time observing her. He saw the way she would look at the small, worn wooden carving of a boy on her shelf, her eyes filled with a grief so deep it was almost tangible. He saw the way she would mend a small tear in a worn child's parka, her fingers tracing the stitching as if it were a memory. He began to understand that the lie was not an act of deception, but an act of protection. She wasn't just hiding her son's death. She was protecting her right to grieve in private, to be left alone by a community that, in her eyes, had judged her and her son. One afternoon, as the wind died down and the sun, a pale disk in the sky, cast long blue shadows, Ayla spoke. "My son's name was Nuna," she said, her voice soft as if she were talking to herself. "He was strong. He knew the land, the elders. They said he was too young to hunt. But I taught him. I gave him the best I could." Her gaze fell on Elias. "They want to say I was a poor mother, that he was weak because I raised him, but that is a lie. He was brave. He was a man." Elias felt a pang of sympathy. "He would have been proud of you," he said, the words feeling inadequate. Ayla scoffed, a dry, bitter sound. "Proud? He's gone. He's part of the land now. I need to be left alone to grieve, to be with the ghosts that are mine alone." The confession hung in the air, a raw, exposed nerve. Elias, for the first time, saw beyond the stern facade. He saw a mother, her heart broken, trying to find a way to live with an unbearable loss. The lie she asked of him was her last bastion of defense, a wall she was building to protect herself from the prying eyes and judgmental words of her own people. Elias's own thoughts were in turmoil. He was a man of the city, of a world where grief was a public spectacle, where people gathered to mourn and to console. Ayla's way was different. It was private, solitary, and fiercely independent. He began to see that her strength was not just in her ability to survive, but in her capacity to endure pain in silence. As the storm finally began to subside, a new kind of tension arose. Soon, Elias would have to leave. Soon, he would have to face the moral choice she had presented to him. He was no longer just a stranded hunter. He was a keeper of a secret, a co-conspirator in a lie that was a truth. The morning of his departure was clear and cold, the snow a pristine, undisturbed sheet. Ayla stood by the door, her face impassive. She handed him a small pouch of food and a set of new, mended leather gloves. "Thank you," Elias said, his voice husky with emotion, "for everything." Ayla simply nodded. "Remember what you have to do," she said. It was not a plea, but a statement of fact. Elias looked at her, at the small, defiant woman standing in the doorway of her cabin. He had come here, a stranger, and she had saved his life. She had asked for one thing in return, a lie that felt more true than any truth he had ever known. He knew in that moment what he had to do. The moral lines he had always believed in had blurred, replaced by a new understanding of compassion and loyalty. He would tell the lie, not for his survival, but for hers. The cold he felt was no longer the physical cold of the wind and snow, but the internal chill of a man who had changed, who had seen a truth that went beyond simple facts and entered the complex emotional landscape of human connection. If you're finding yourself captivated by this story, please show your support by subscribing and hitting the bell icon. Your support helps us create more content like this. Elias's journey back was a grueling one, but the mental burden was heavier than the physical. Each step was a rehearsal of the lie, the words forming in his mind, feeling both alien and strangely right. He knew his story would be met with scrutiny. He was a good liar, but he was not an experienced one. He was a man who had always lived by a simple, straightforward code. Now that code was shattered. He arrived at the outskirts of his village, a disheveled figure, his face gaunt, his limp pronounced. A search party was being organized, and the men of his hunting party were there, their relief turning to confusion as they saw him. They asked 1,000 questions at once, their voices a flurry of concern and curiosity. Where did you go? How did you survive? Elias took a deep breath. I was lost, he said, his voice steady. The storm caught me. I was close to dying. He paused, his gaze meeting theirs. Then I found a cabin, an old trapper's cabin. It was empty. The fire was out, but the provisions were still there. I stayed for a few weeks, until the storm passed. Then I left. The men nodded, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. One of them, a grizzled old hunter named Samuel, eyed him with suspicion. An empty cabin, in this weather. You were lucky, boy. Elias met his gaze without flinching. Luckier than I deserve, he said. The lie was simple, easy to believe, because it was plausible. A trapper could have left the cabin for a season and not returned. The truth, in this case, would have been far more difficult for them to accept. A single woman, living alone, surviving on her own terms, was an anomaly. A mother grieving in private was a wound they would have felt compelled to try and heal, or worse, to judge. Later, as he was resting, his leg elevated, an elder from the village, a man known for his wisdom and his gentle demeanor, came to speak with him. The elder, with his deep, knowing eyes, looked at Elias. You've seen things, young man, he said, his voice a low rumble, the kind of things that change a man. Elias nodded. The storm. It was a thing of great power. The elder smiled, a sad, knowing expression. The storm outside is nothing compared to the one within. Did you find a woman in that cabin, Elias? A woman of our people? Did she ask you to keep her secret? Elias's heart pounded. He had been so careful, so sure of his lie. The elder's words were not an accusation, but a simple, profound truth. He looked at the elder, his mind racing. He could deny it, but he knew the elder would see through the lie. The man was not asking for a confession. He was asking for an understanding. I found a cabin, Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. And I found a woman, Ayla. She was alone. He paused, the finality of the lie hanging in the air. He would not betray her. He could not. She was a mother. She had lost her son. She asked me to let her be. The elder nodded slowly. He did not press for details, for names, for places. He simply looked at Elias, his eyes filled with a new kind of respect. Sometimes, he said, the truest stories are not the ones we speak, but the ones we keep, the ones we carry for others. Elias realized then that the elder knew. He knew about Ayla. He knew about the grief she carried, the independence she demanded. He was not there to expose her, but to understand. And in that moment, Elias understood too. The lie was not for him or for them. It was for Ayla. It was a way of honoring her sorrow, of respecting her fierce need for solitude. It was the only way to help her survive. He would never see Ayla again. She was a ghost in the vast expanse of the Alaskan wilderness, a memory of a woman who had taught him that survival was not just about fire and food, but about compassion, loyalty, and the quiet dignity of a mother's grief. He had come to the cabin seeking warmth, and he had left with a cold, hard truth that some secrets are meant to be kept and some lies are the only way to be truly honest. The cold he felt was the enduring chill of a changed heart, a heart that had learned the true weight of a human burden in the heart of a merciless land. That's it for our story. Thank you for watching and for being a part of this journey. We hope you enjoyed it. To support the channel, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more amazing stories like this one. We'll see you next time.